Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another webinar by RoasterTools. My name is Jon Ewalt, and I'm the founder of RoasterTools. And today I'm joined by Allen Burt. Hey, Allen, how's everybody doing today?
Doing good. Excited to be on.
So we'll let folks kind of trickle in here. Here they're coming. Thank you again for joining us. I know it's a crazy time. Folks are working from home like I am here. Kids might be in the background, so I apologize if you hear any noise or if my door opens and suddenly my 9-year-old comes running in, or my 4. Today's topic is really relevant because, as we all know, wholesale has been badly affected by everything that's happening. So we're focusing on e-commerce. E-commerce is definitely the wave of the future for the foreseeable future. And so I brought in an expert who can kind of help guide us about what to do today. And Allen, do you mind just introducing yourself and give us a little background?
Yeah, happy to. So my name is Allen Burt. I run a firm by the name of Blue Stout, and our expertise is working primarily with, we call them physical products online retailers. These are guys that are selling online, selling physical goods, so not digital goods, not digital marketing. It's all based around physical products, e-commerce. And what we do is we help these brands scale their businesses online by focusing on how do you actually sell more of what you're doing, of your product, to your existing traffic and your existing customer base. And so that's what we'll talk about today is you guys that maybe, majority of the business is wholesale, maybe you do a little bit of online, maybe you don't, maybe you're looking at online. Let's talk about how we can get you set up and how you can set up yourselves to sell product online that's actually going to sell, right? There's a science to it, there's a formula to it. And then also how can you actually, if you're already selling online, how can you actually double down on that and create some more leverage? We'll talk about how to do all that today. That's great.
That's great. As we get folks kind of to join in here and we start to talk about what we're doing, a couple housekeeping. Do want to mention that we do have chat. We do have a Q&A. So if you have questions, there is a Q&A button, and I'll be moderating that to kind of feed it back into Allen. So if you guys want to take a look at that, have any questions, put them in the chat. Put them in the Q&A, and that's a good way to go. And I know that people are great, so getting some feedback in the chat there. Allen, I don't know, I should ask, are you going to be looking at that at all, or should I just focus on that exclusively?
Yeah, if you want to just focus on the chat and then just feed me questions that are relevant, that'd be great.
Great. Great. Hello. So one thing I don't think we mentioned, actually it happens to be that Allen and I are both in Oregon. So I'm in Portland, and Allen's in Bend, Oregon, another community here. So I know we have folks joining from all over the world. Hello, hope everybody's well. And I think at that point, great. So we've got a first question coming in. So Allen, do you want to kick things off? Do you want to kind of get things going?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start sharing the presentation. We can walk through it. And my approach is very casual. So feel free, ask questions at any point in time, direct me at any point in time, and let's go off on tangents. The whole goal here is let's make this really helpful. And so I'm happy to kind of talk about anything you guys want to talk about as we start working through this. Uh-oh, is that the wrong one? Let's see. You guys got it?
Okay.
Cool. All right.
Great.
There we go. We got the glitches out of the way early.
Woo!
Cool. Okay. So the whole concept today is what we want to talk about is how can you sell more of your product, right? More of your coffee online. And the way we're going to talk about doing that is by specifically how do you do that by increasing your customer retention and selling through subscriptions, right? The beauty of a consumable product like coffee, consumable products are my favorite types of physical products to sell online anyway, because you immediately have a recurring customer base that's going to come back and buy if they like what you do. So what I want to talk about today, you guys are in a perfect position to build incredible online and scale incredible online businesses just by the nature of the fact that your product is a consumable. So we want to talk about that today and how can you actually leverage that better by building in more retention and then leveraging things like subscription. And we'll also talk about email to drive people to come back and buy again and again and again. So, okay, so kind of some of the things we're going to talk about. And I recognize that a lot of you guys probably are not, maybe are not selling online, or it's not a big part of the business yet. So some of these acronyms I'm going to throw out are going to be foreign. So I'm going to do my best to sort of explain things for folks that are new to online, but then also make this very relevant for those of you that are already selling online. So a couple of things we're going to be talking about today is how to increase what we call your AOV, your repeat purchase, and your CLTV, right? So that sounds like foreign Greek if you've never heard the terms before. The whole concept is in e-commerce, your AOV is your order value. What's the average amount that somebody buys from you when they buy from your store? And there's very specific ways you can go about increasing that. Because obviously if somebody buys a $15 bag of coffee on your store one time, or they come and they buy $60 worth of coffee one time, that's very different effects for your revenue. So we wanted to focus on how can we actually increase the amount of coffee and amount of product people are buying when they shop with you. And then also how do you increase the amount of times they come back to buy? And that's ultimately going to affect what we call your lifetime value. So what's the total customer lifetime value? So as a business, what you should all be trying to do is increasing this thing we call customer lifetime value. And that's what we might CLTV. Some ways to do that: subscription programs, right? So if you have a subscription program, we'll talk about specifically how to optimize it. If you don't, we'll talk about a very easy way to get set up with it, with existing technology that exists out there. Also talk about how do you actually upsell existing customers into that subscription, right? So it's great if you have one, but how do you actually get folks who are buying from you to opt in or sort of change their habits from buying one-off to then buying subscriptions? So we'll talk about that in a second too. And then at the very end, we'll talk a little about email. Email is, especially in sort of today's environment, is probably going to be your highest return on investment time spent channel, right? Customers you already have, or customers' email addresses that you've already acquired. Those are folks that are literally sitting there on a list that you need to be leveraging to drive sales, as opposed to going out and spending ad dollars to pull people in. So we're going to talk about how you should be leveraging email to drive more revenue. And the metric we always say is that if you're not driving at least 30%, or 25 to 35% of your total revenue from email, then you're leaving a lot of money on the table. So we'll talk about how to do that.
And Allen, can you just, when you say driving, you're saying that somebody clicks on an email, makes a purchase because of it? Is that what you mean?
100%. Yeah.
Cool.
So as opposed to somebody like clicking on an ad and then coming to your store and buying, this is somebody that's clicking on an email and coming to the store and buying.
Okay, great.
So I already talked about who I am, so we'll go ahead and skip this. So this is the reason I always put this slide when I talk to folks is I think a lot of brands and a lot of businesses, especially online businesses, think about this backwards. They're always thinking, okay, let's build a store, let's start selling online, and let's drive traffic, right? And of course you need traffic, you need customers, you need eyeballs coming into the site, but it's actually the last thing you should be thinking about. The very first thing you should be thinking about is, okay, for those people that are coming, that we are going to drive the store eventually, how do we actually make sure we sell them more than we would otherwise? So we like to flip the equation upside down and say, okay, the very first thing you should be thinking about is how do you actually increase the lifetime value of your customer, right? How do you create a scenario and create leverage in your business so when people buy, or when you do finally get somebody to come and buy from you, you're actually maximizing the amount that they're going to buy. So that's the very first thing you should be doing. Then you should be focusing on like how well your store is converting, and then after you've solved those two problems, then you should be focusing on driving more traffic through things like PR, advertising, social, whatever it may be. So most folks think of this the opposite way. We like to flip it on its head. And so the whole point of the conversation that we're going to be having today is how do you increase this lifetime value? How do you create this leverage in your online store? So that way, when you go out and start actually driving traffic and pulling people in, you know it's going to work, and you know they're going to buy large amounts, and it's going to be profitable at the end of the day. A lot of folks get into this, start driving ads, and they find out after the fact that they drove all this ad traffic, people bought all this product, but they had no profit margin after it was all done because they didn't flip the equation on its head.
That's great.
Okay, so the three things very specifically we're going to be talking about in terms of how to do this with your store is, first off, how do you actually increase the order value for a one-off purchase? So for people that are coming and they're buying one thing, they're making one order, how do you ensure that order is actually a high number, right? So as opposed to buying $15 worth of coffee, how do you get them to buy $100 worth of coffee, as an example? The second thing we're going to be talking about is subscriptions. Subscriptions are just a fantastic way to build in recurring revenue. If you talk to anybody who runs like a SaaS company or a technology company, like recurring revenue is like this. It's like the goose that lays the golden egg, right? And that's like the ultimate goal. People want recurring revenue. And the beauty of a consumable products business, like what you guys all operate, is that you can build in recurring revenue by things like subscription programs. So we'll talk about really easy ways to get set up with subscriptions. If you guys have questions on it, we can even go really in depth on some advanced tactics, but the very bare minimum, I just want to make sure you guys all know how easy it is to get started with this. Because even if you have a small percentage, of your customer base coming through subscriptions, it's recurring, it's consistent, it's predictable, and it really helps you kind of get through times like now, right? Where things are very unpredictable. And then the final thing we'll talk about is retention. The first two don't matter if you can't keep bringing customers back and back and back again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So specifically, we'll talk about what can you do to drive repeat purchases on your store for folks that are just buying, one-off purchases. And then we'll also talk about how do you actually increase that retention for folks that are already on your subscription program.
Great.
So here are those acronyms again. So the reason I show these is not to put you guys to sleep, but it's because at the end of the day, you have to have the foundations correct. You have to know the math, or else none of this works, right? And everything we're talking about today is about creating leverage through an online store so that you actually can generate profits at the end of the day. And so the equation I always present to people in e-commerce, it's very, very simple, right? It's traffic times your store's conversion rate times that order value equals your revenue. That's it, right? It's a very simple equation. So if you want to drive more revenue, you have to increase one of those three things. It's order value, it's your conversion, or it's traffic. And one of the easiest ways to do it, to focus on profit, is your average order value. Because at the end of the day, you can increase traffic, but maybe the cost to acquire those folks is going up, right? So to get incrementally more folks to your store, you end up spending incrementally more in advertising. So that reduces your profit margin. So AOV is the best way to, your order value is the best way to focus on increasing revenue while also maintaining a high profit margin.
Great.
And so that's what we mean. And we say CAC is less than your CLTV. The whole point is you want to build a business where you can acquire customers at a lower rate than what they are worth after they buy from you.
And CAC is the cost of acquiring a customer.
Yeah, customer acquisition cost is how we define it.
Yeah.
And then again, CLTV is the customer lifetime value.
Great.
So again, the end of the day is if you're going to set this up and you're going to go online, let's make sure you've got the foundation in place so that these equations actually work and you're profitable at the end of the day.
Love it.
Cool. Okay, so let's talk about how do you actually drive higher order values through sales online. So what you'll find most often, right, is you go to a store and we've actually worked for coffee brands in the past, worked for a lot of consumer brands. You'll go to the store and they'll just offer their product for sale, right? 1 bag, 2 bag, 3 bags. End of the day, it's very difficult to be profitable if you're driving traffic through ads. It's very difficult to maintain a high profit margin on a single bag of coffee. So let's say the average cost per bag of coffee is probably anywhere from $10 to $25, kind of depending on the size and the brand, right? There's a great example of a brand called Life Boost. If you guys have ever heard of Life Boost, these guys do a fantastic job of driving paid traffic, right? So these are targeted ads that they're putting on places like Facebook, on Instagram, on Snapchat, on Pinterest, and they drive them to a landing page. And on that landing page, they actually give a couple offers. They never offer a single bag. If you go to their website, you can buy through a single bag, but the targeted, very specific traffic that they're driving through Facebook or through Instagram, sometimes through email, is going to a landing page that only gives them 2 offers. And those offers are immediately high average order value offers. So they don't even offer product for that targeted traffic for a lower size or a lower amount of product. So the idea here is that you want to start looking at bundled offers. And so this is the best way to increase AOV is by bundling product together and showing an incentive for buying more than 1 bag at a time or more than a small amount at one time. And so this is a great example for how to do that. It's giving people 2 options saying, okay, look, buy 3 bags, you get 50% off, or you buy sort of our turbo boost, which I think is in this case like 6 bags and you save over $100. So it's giving people an incentive to buy more for every single purchase.
And Allen, one thing that coffee roasters are sometimes concerned about, and I'm sure that people are gonna mention this, is I love it when my customer orders more, but I worry about it going stale. So a lot of the roasters in the community here are going to be worried about, if they order 6 bags, is it going to be a bad product when they finally finish that 6th bag? And so one thing when I thought of bundled, I thought of actually mixed like coffee plus marketing or other things that could be thrown in there. How effective is that? How effective is taking your core product and adding on other things into it?
Incredibly effective. So what would be an example you think for the coffee space?
Well, we all might be sitting on shirts, like literally t-shirts, marketing goods, like things that just help our brand. And my 100%. Thought is give that away for free. Do the $50 offer for 2 bags or 3 bags and then throw in the t-shirt and then that's the Benny.
100%. So. Yeah. So any sort of incentive you give that's going to increase the perceived value, of the offering is going to help help convert, right? So the challenge with bundles, right, is that like when you start bundling products together and start increasing the price point, the concern is always lowering that conversion rate, right? So you might be selling more of a product, but your conversion goes far down, so you end up seeing revenue drop more than you want it to. So the goal when you're doing bundles is actually to test this, and so to try different offerings, try different landing pages, try driving people to different offerings to see which one is that sweet spot between maintaining a high conversion rate, but also keeping a really high order value. Mm-hmm. And so like this is an example from LifeBoost. They've I know the guys that run the company. They tested dozens of different offers before they found that this was what contributed the highest amount of revenue. Without sort of hurting conversion rate.
Okay.
But including things other than just your core product is a great example, right? So like let's say for example you sell maybe there's actually also like equipment. Maybe you sell like AeroPress, or you sell like
yes.
any types of equipment that goes with making your product. Another great way to increase AOV would be to do like a bundled offer that's maybe 2 bags of coffee and an AeroPress, right? So something that helps you increase your margins, but then you don't have to worry about sort of shelf life.
And I think that that's also relevant right now because you might have inventory that you've already paid for that's an asset that you have, and you've got to leverage
just
that.
In the books.
Yeah, and so in this current environment, sell that down, get rid of that right now, and find a way to leverage that to sell your most profitable product, which is your coffee. So I would definitely look at this, the bundling idea and trying different things.
Yeah, and the beauty of it too is that when you are you've got assets or you've got product that you've already got on hand, you've already purchased and you get rid of, the benefit there is that you can throw those in to increase the perceived value. You can also kind of give the discount, but maintain that high AOV is going to allow you to actually go out and drive some traffic with paid advertising, right? And if it's already an asset you've already got already, right? It's pretty much a win-win because you get to sell it off because it's sitting on your books anyway. So there's a ton of value in doing other than just product bundles, but also doing sort of like physical hard goods that aren't consumables.
Great. Okay. Cool.
So the first place to start would be looking at product bundles. Subscriptions. So let's talk about subscriptions. So I'm not sure how familiar everybody here is with Death Wish. Death Wish is a pretty fast growing brand over the last few years. Another CEO, another head of e-commerce. These guys have done an incredible job on a lot of different fronts. But if you're focusing on subscriptions, right? So like bundles would be sort of one option. You can also do subscriptions in addition to that, and we can talk about sort of how to balance those two together later if you guys want to. But looking very specifically in a very simple way to introduce subscriptions to start would be something just like what Death Wish does. And it's offering just what we call a simple subscribe and save, right? And this is based upon, so the history of this is Amazon, right? So like Amazon was the very first one that sort of started this subscribe and save movement. And then, everybody else in sort of the private e-commerce space jumped right in. And it converts very well for consumables, especially for folks that are coming back to buy a product that they've already bought before. So sometimes subscriptions can be a lot harder to convert on a very first time buyer. And that's where you test things like bundled offers. And sometimes you can do a bundle plus a subscription side by side and see which converts better. But for folks that you're driving back to the store to buy. So let's say you have somebody who's bought one product from you, one bag, now they're on your email list, and you send them a specific email that drives them back to repurchase your product. Sending them to a page that's going to offer this type of offering. You can buy your one bag again, or you can sign up for a subscription and save 10% because you're going to continually buy our product anyway. So it's a great pitch to get somebody on a subscription.
So this may be a naive question, but is this logic conditional? Like, are brands basically only showing this if they know that the customer has already purchased, or are they just always showing these things?
It depends. It depends upon the sophistication of the brand and what they've set up. My recommendation would be to be sophisticated. Once you get this, so to start, set it up. Just get it going and see what your opt-in rates for subscription look like. You need to have sort of a core set of data to see how it performs before you start optimizing it. But yes, what we would say is, figure out for your just general traffic that's coming to the store, what your offerings are going to be. And something like this would be a great place to start. And then once you have the data, you know how well it converts, and you already have a customer list of people who have bought, then you can take that customer list and start driving them to specific landing pages that have different types of offerings.
Is there any harm in having every product that you basically sell be a subscription? and I don't know if you're going to go through this later on the presentation, but should we be doing this as a blanket? Everybody can subscribe to every product.
For this space, I would say yes.
Okay.
In this space, I would have everything be if it's a consumable product in the coffee space, I would say yes.
And my only one caveat for our friends out there is just make sure that you can actually follow through. So if somebody's subscribing to a single origin coffee that you can't deliver in 3 months, especially with the uncertainty of getting new crop coffees or whatever might happen. But I don't think that, I've talked in previous webinars about building out, brands that like basically using your blends as like micro brands. And I think that's a perfect example of what I would do in this situation is leverage something that you can always have access to. You might be changing the components inside, but you could always deliver it 6 or 12 months down the road. Because I don't know how well you can change out the subscription on your end as a producer. Allen, can you easily shift people from one subscription to another in these platforms?
So it depends. So, if what you're going to have to ship every month or every 3 months or whatever the duration is going to change, I'd be very clear, make that a product, right? Like, call that like the discovery subscription, right? Or like, our tastemaker subscription, whatever you want to call it, right?
Roaster's Choice is the common one.
Roaster's Choice. Yeah. Fantastic, right? And so I would just be very clear about what you're signing people up for.
Great.
Because at the end of the day, then you're going to have high churn if it's not, if expectations aren't set, right? And we'll talk about all that in a second. How do you reduce churn? But people that are churning from a subscription that didn't have the experience that they expected to have, it's also going to make it much less likely they're going to come back and buy one off. So you do want to be very, very careful and upfront.
Okay. I know that this will come up at some point, but this is this type of subscription is one model where you basically go into the product and you're subscribing to it. The other thing that I've seen roasters do in the past is kind of like the term limit, right? Like I'm going to buy it for 12 months and then it's going to cancel.
Yep. Sure.
Is there a clear preference in the community, in the e-commerce community about one or the other, or should we offer both?
The preference is always, infinite, right?
Right.
There's no reason to cancel, there's no reason to give somebody so it's in the end of the day, it has to be congruent with what you're offering, right? So like if what you're offering is, is something that doesn't make sense to deliver after 12 months, right? Then let's be upfront, honest, and let's be congruent with our brand positioning and messaging. But, Coffee and Death Wish is the perfect example here. Is like they sell, this is a very specific product, right? And there's no reason if you are a diehard Death Wish drinker and this is all you drink, there's no reason you should cancel in 12 months. So why even offer that as an option?
That's great.
And again, at the end of the day, you want to test, right? You want to test this stuff. But what I want to do today is try to not get too nitty gritty in terms of, and get too overly complicated, because you can test everything. And that's eventually what we end up doing for our clients. But you're going to be way better off starting with this and just getting it set up and just seeing how many people opt in, because something's better than nothing. And then we can talk about how to optimize, down the road.
Great. So Allen, I definitely see that there's some questions coming in about, okay. So there's a couple questions about like a minimum subscription, like whether you should only do it for 2 bags. So kind of, it almost combines this average order value. And if somebody's subscribing to a single bag, that's a 12-ounce bag, that's maybe a $15 item, does that make sense to ship out? There's shipping costs. There's all of these other things that kind of go into that. Yep. What's the threshold? What kind of,
Yeah. So it's a fantastic question. And at the end of the day, it comes down to operations, right? You got to understand your, what we call unit economics, right? Like what's the cost and profit margin on a per bag versus 2 bags, right? And so some of that you do have to, you've got to make the right operational business decisions as to, what's going to be profitable. So if you're profitable on a single bag, shipping it, fantastic, right? Let's do it. If it takes 2 bags, right? So maybe you, instead of shipping a bag every month, you're shipping 2 bags every 2 months, right? So that way you're able to sort of consolidate some of that shipping and sort of fulfillment expense. And so you do have to run the numbers, right? And then, you mentioned sort of the shelf life of a product. It also depends on sort of the shelf life of the bag. Can you ship 3 bags? Does it make sense to do 3 bags at a time, or do you need to keep it more fresh? So there are, there's a give and takes on that. And order value wise though, it's for once you have somebody on subscription, it's less about, order value, and it's much more about churn, because you want to keep people in the program. And so whether or not you're doing a bag per month or 2 bags every other month, that's probably more of a sort of a shipping cost analysis.
And one thing I just want to point out to those on the call here is the reality of 3 or 4 weeks ago and the reality of today. It might have felt like if I sent a bag to a consumer once every week, you'd been like, they'll finish it. Like that's okay. That's appropriate. I know at my house, because every cup of coffee is coming from my house right now, it's gone up. Our coffee consumption's gone up. So I think that we have to kind of take off the what's normal kind of hat and like put on like the opportunity hat and say, all right, now maybe we need to ship a little bit more. Maybe it's okay that we push a little bit higher quantity because of this freshness factor, and kind of lean into that. So I think that there's just a little bit of, mindset shift that the community has to take.
100%. And test, right? The idea is try one thing, send feedback, for everybody who's in your subscription program, send out surveys and determine kind of happiness factor, determine, if you updated this to, 2 bags per month, would that fit you better, right? So there's ways to iterate once you've got this rolling and you have customers that are actually in the subscription.
Yeah, great. There's definitely a lot of questions coming in. I'm probably going to save some of those because I think otherwise we're going to,
Sure.
I don't know if you want to, or you want to just dive right in, but
no, it's up to you. You know what we're going over. And like I said, we'll keep this super casual, and we can answer questions, or we can kind of continue through content, whatever you think is more helpful.
Why don't we do this? I think let's go through content, and then we'll save some time at the end, just because I know that there might be your content might answer some of these questions ahead of time. So
let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
So real quick, and this is for folks that don't have subscription programs set up, I do want to touch on sort of what we call the tech stack, because I think a lot of folks tend to get stuck on this, like, well, how do I do it, right? And the reality is there's actually very simple ways to do this. The technology exists, and it's just sort of plug and play. So if you have yet to get set up with subscriptions, the way you should do it is, first off, if you're selling through a pretty standard e-commerce platform, and the most standard ones out there would be Shopify, BigCommerce, and WooCommerce now. There's Magento, there's lots of other ones, but these would be, if you're trying to get started and you're early, these would be the 3 I'd be focusing on. And of these 3, I'd be focusing on Shopify specifically because it makes it even easier than anybody else. If you're operating on something like Squarespace or anything like that, I would recommend upgrading to something like a Shopify, because it's just going to make your life a heck of a lot easier. But assuming you're on an e-commerce platform like one of these guys, the number one subscription program service out there right now is a company called Recharge. They make it super easy. It's an app. You add your store. You can automatically start selling products through subscription. They handle all the charging, credit card charging, recurring billing, etc. That'd be the basis, right? At least get those 2 set up. The next 2 I'd recommend sort of layer on top of that would be a product called Churn Buster. These guys handle what's called dunning automation. So when folks' credit cards fail, payment fails, they actually handled all of the sort of back end process that would be required to kind of reach out or try the card again. You can actually build out email campaigns that get sent to folks automatically to remind them they need to update their card or call their bank. So as opposed to you having to handle every single sort of failed payment, this is a software that helps handle what's called dunning. And then the number 1 tool for retention is going to be email by far. The tool we recommend for email marketing and email management is a tool called Klaviyo. It plugs directly into Recharge and Shopify, and you can pull incredible data out of it. We'll talk about what you can do with that in a second. But these would be the tools we're looking at to set up subscription.
Great.
Okay, so let's talk about retention, because at the end of the day, once you've kind of figured out your AOV, your order value, you've increased it. Once you've got folks on subscription, at the end of the day, now it's all about bringing people to come and buy and buy and buy again. Especially in times like now, where it's going to be a lot harder to convert somebody who's a cold, potential customer, because wallets are tightening up a little bit. There's just a lot of opportunity out there in the market, right? It's going to be a lot harder to convert a first-time buyer than ever before. So you need to be doubling down and focusing on existing audiences, folks that already know who you are, and then most importantly, existing customers. So folks that have already bought from you or customers that are already on your subscription program. So we'll talk about what are the areas to be focusing on to increase what we call quote unquote retention of these customers. So the first place is focusing on before they even buy, right? And this is where most people miss this, but focusing on getting somebody to buy from you, and the way that they buy from you is going to influence how long they stay with you, right? So if you trick somebody into buying, they're not gonna be around for very long, right? Versus somebody who's got this incredibly strong emotional connection with what you do before they even buy the product, and they just love it. They've got this sort of affinity towards the brand. That's somebody that's gonna be much more willing to maybe endure some slip ups on your side, right? Maybe some late deliveries, maybe a product that wasn't quite perfect. That perfect person's gonna be much more likely to stick around. And so if you can focus on building out what we call selling with emotion and then justifying with logic before they even buy, that emotional connection they have with the brand is just gonna make it far more likely to stick with you, even if you do something wrong. So we'll kind of graze through this real quick, because I think everybody kind of gets the concept. But the areas you want to be focusing on is, not just throwing subscriptions up there, but are you actually building an emotional connection with your customers in this purchase experience, right? End of the day, like if you're buying a premium bag of coffee, like you're kind of a coffee nut. Like you're not the guy out there buying Folders or Dunkin' Donuts, right? Like there's different tiers of coffee. There's folks that are, coffee connoisseurs, drink it black, love it. They make it multiple different types of ways. And I'm assuming most folks on here are catering to those types of folks. Right. There's a strong emotional connection to that, right? Like use that, leverage it, right? Whether it's imagery, whether it's video, right? Whether it's sort of icons or iconography that's explaining sort of the notes and elements and tasting notes of that particular blend, whatever it may be, right? So lots of ways that you can build an emotional connection versus just focusing on the transaction. And if you can get them emotionally hooked, it's gonna be a lot easier to convert them, and B, it's much more likely they're gonna stick around. So the areas you should be focusing on are imagery, incredible imagery, iconography that talks about unique benefits, sales copy, incredibly important. If your brand's witty, make sure your copy's witty. If your brand's straightforward, make sure your copy's straightforward. Like match your tone. And then product videos are a fantastic way to drive emotion.
And let's be honest, like coffee is one of those things that we've got a daily date with coffee, right? Like we have an emotional connection. It is literally the way that I handle my kids in the morning. And, right. There's so much to work with.
I joke with my wife that's like, I got to tap the vein every morning. Like it's like my day does not start, and it has to be good coffee. Like we're lucky we live in Oregon, and it's prevalent here. And so you can get incredible coffee, but for folks that are most likely buying all of y'all's product, it's an emotional, it's a necessity of their day. Mm-hmm. So leverage that. Logic. And again, I'll sort of skip over this, but it's the piece I think a lot of people miss, which is end of the day, right? Like if you want people to stay and come back and buy again from you, there has to be congruency, right? And that comes down to sort of answering the logical questions that they're going to have. So like, for example, right? Like they signed up for a subscription program, like great, they signed up. When's the first bag arrive, right? How often does it come, right? Like how big is the bag? If I want to cancel, how do I cancel? If it's a bag, like how do I reach out to customer service? Can I return this? Can I not return this? All these questions are logical questions. So even once you sell them emotionally, if you're not answering the logical questions, and those logical questions aren't congruent with the way you actually deliver your product, people are going to churn. They're going to leave. They're not going to be retained. And so you need to be focusing on, okay, what are all these questions or barriers or mental barriers people have with buying our product? And then how can you make sure you deliver that and communicate that in a way that's going to set the proper expectations, so when they do receive their product, they're not going, WTF, this isn't what I thought it was, right? So thinking through, sell with emotion, but then what are all the logical things we need to explain to somebody so that when they receive our product, it's a congruent experience of what they thought when they first put their credit card down. So this sort of explains kind of like all the different sort of questions you'd ask, for sort of determining logic.
And just to be clear, we're going to be able to provide the slides.
Yeah, we'll send all this to you guys.
So don't worry about taking notes. And again, we're hoping to have some time at the end of this where we can, answer questions and everything. So no worries there. Yeah,
I'm trying to keep it high level. We could spend days talking about this stuff, but I'm trying to keep it straightforward and then let you guys kind of ask questions if you want to go into nitty-gritty.
Great.
Okay, so let's talk about the second piece of retention. Email. There's lots of ways to do retention. There's retargeting ads. There's sort of loyalty programs. There's community. There's tons of things you can leverage. And
there's been a couple questions about loyalty already.
Yeah, we can talk about loyalty. Loyalty is fantastic for this type of vertical. But regardless, don't start any of that until you've nailed email. It should be your highest ROI, so return on investment channel of anything you do, especially when it comes to retention. It's, you've got a list, you've got customers, you've got an email account, send emails, right? Like it couldn't be simpler than that. So what you want to be doing with goals, and there's lots of things you just do with email. We can talk about other areas of email in a second, but to focus specifically on retention, after somebody buys from you or signs up for a subscription for you, what you want to be doing initially, immediately, is doing three things: setting expectations, right? When's the product going to come? How big is it? Answer any questions that are about that thing being delivered, right? Inspire use / inspire getting started. And so what you want is adoption, right? So you send somebody a product and they don't use it, they're never going to buy it again, right? Now, luckily, coffee is sort of an addictive habit. It's something you do every day. So there's some natural adoption associated with that already. But let's actually inspire somebody to adopt it, right? So maybe this is the first time they've ever tried your brand. Maybe they got something they use every day already. So actually getting them to use this new bag, maybe they're gonna sit it in the back of the closet or sit in the back of the pantry until they finish their current bag, right? Like, let's get them to pull that one out first and use that one now and leave that other bag up for a later date, right? So how do you inspire them to start using it the day they get it? So copy, video, talking about how to make the perfect cup with the blend that they've bought, right? Like techniques, anything that's going to get them interested and inspired to use it immediately is going to help build up more emotional connection and help build up retention. And email's a great way to do that. You know when it's going to arrive, the estimated delivery dates, right? You can target your email sends specifically so they're delivered on the day you want them to be delivered. That's going to help inspire them. So like email that's going to inspire them, get them excited before your product arrives, and then after it arrives, email that's going to again help sort of build up that adoption and usage. And email is the best way to do that. And you can use what's called automated emails. And so again, some of you guys are probably already doing this. For those that don't understand, you can set up there's two different types of emails. There's manual campaigns. So these are just write an email, you send it to your list or a segment of your list. Right. And there's automations. And automations are these email campaigns that you've set up already, right? So the other term is a drip campaign or a flow campaign. And they're started based upon an action the customer took. So in this case, they bought a product or they signed up for a subscription, triggers an event, and all of a sudden you have this series of, call it 6 emails that are firing in a specific cadence after that fact. So you can pre-build these sequences and set them up automatically. And so I highly recommend that all of you guys do that.
One thing I was going to say is that we had an email copywriter on, and this was last week. And one of the things that she mentioned is just go review those drip emails if you do have those, to make sure that the tone is appropriate for right now. So, just take a second. If you have anything that's automated, even if it's a thank you email, just make sure that there's not, you talk about brand. If it's witty, if it's too funny, it could feel off right now. So
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely right. Seen a bunch of emails come out with April Fool's jokes today. It's like, really?
Yeah.
Maybe not the right time. For some brands, it's good, but for other brands, it's not. So it's like you gotta, know your room, know your audience. Okay, so it's email. So, and I'll mention this because I think this is sort of inherent into understanding how you should leverage email and sort of making sure this all makes sense. But the way you should be thinking about email if you're selling online is it should essentially match your customer's journey. So if you're setting up these automations, as an example, people are going to come, have like a first visit with the brand, they're going to browse product, they might add a cart, they can make the first purchase, they're going to make their second purchase or sign up for subscription. You should be using email automations at each of these sort of core stages of the customer journey to push them to the next stage. So if somebody signs up, for their first bag of coffee with you, the whole idea there is fire an automated email sequence that's going to increase that emotional connection, get them adopting and using the product, and then ultimately upsells them or pushes them to that second purchase or a subscription or a bundled offer. So when we work with clients and set up automations, we're looking at anywhere from 5 to 8, very specific automation sequences that we're going to structure at each of these main kind of points in the customer journey. And so when you're looking at, right now, we talk a lot about clients about building leverage today because just of the uncertainty of the times, like leverage your existing customers and leverage your existing traffic as much as possible. Email automations is one of the top ways to do that. If you haven't built these, you're leaving money on the table. So that's a sort of an aside, but it's relevant to what we're talking about right now.
And one thing I'd love to know is if folks could just go put in the chat, I don't have a pull up, but what percentage of people are actually already doing subscriptions? just give us a kind of a yes or a hands raise or something. 'Cause I'm curious how relevant that is. Yeah. So people are raising their hands. That's great.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So cool.
Awesome. Okay. So we'll talk about then, and so we're going to talk about this sort of examples of flows you should be setting up on the back end, but we can answer questions about that later if you guys have questions about email automations. And we'll sort of skip the email segmentation piece too here. We'll touch on it because it is relevant to retention. So since we're talking about email, if you have a list of existing customers, right, what you should not be doing when you send out your weekly newsletters or whatever you're sending out on a regular basis, you should not be sending out to your entire list. What you should be doing is segmenting that list based upon where somebody is in their journey with you. So if somebody's bought 5 products from you, 5 bags of coffee from you, they should be getting much more email and much more correspondence because they are clearly a brand advocate. They love you. They love what you do. They're going to engage more with the more you send. Somebody bought 1 bag of coffee from me 6 months ago and never came back to the site. Stop sending them an email every week. A, they're not opening it. And B, they're probably going to mark you as spam. And if they're not opening it, it's just hurting your sender reputation score and your likelihood of getting all of your promotions actually put into Gmail. So there's a lot of strategy with regards to how you should do this. Also, if you're sending an email, a weekly email to somebody who hasn't bought a product from you 6 months, the other downside too is that now they're just used to getting it and they're deleting it. Versus if they got an email from you once a quarter or maybe once every other month, they're actually going to be much more likely to open because it's less frequent. And then they actually open it, they're more likely to engage, more likely to click back to the site, and ultimately more likely to buy. So you can actually sell more product through email by sending less if you just structure the cadence of your sends based upon the engagement of the different segments of your list, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. Do you mean that we would have a broadcast A that goes to certain customers and a broadcast B that goes to others, and the content on those is actually completely different? Or is it that the less frequent people just happen to get the email once every quarter that's the same one that's going to the other list?
Kind of depends. So what we'd say is, let's say, for most brands we work with, so the average number of email sends is probably somewhere between 8 to 12 a month on average. So if there's 8 to 12
that's
emails,
good to know right there. I think that's probably less than or more than people are doing today.
People are drastically undersending email. Email, the way to drive more revenue from email is to send more email, but to send it to very specific segments of your list. So, and depending upon, we call these engagement tiers. So you'd say, and this is just this is sort of an example on the right-hand side. We create engagement tiers that are custom to the client because it kind of depends on the vertical and everything. But this gives you an understanding of let's say if somebody opens up every single email, or they open up 2 emails a month, or they open up an email and they've purchased a product, or they've purchased 2+ products in a month. There's all these different types of tiers that we would determine engagement by. And you'd say, okay, the most engaged people, we're going to send the most content to. And typically that's going to be a 50-50 mix of just high value content, here's how you use an AeroPress, or here's the background story of how we, how we source, our beans, right? And this is us in, Ecuador, and they're like really high value, cool content that your customer is going to engage with. And then the other 50% should be actually pushing product, whether it's a promotion or a new product release or something along those lines. And that's your most engaged segment. And then as you kind of start to decrease down the engagement tiers, it will depend. So, you might say if your least engaged tier then gets 2 emails a month, right? Or an email a month, you'd say, okay, 1 month we're going to send them content. The next month we're going to send them a sales promotion, right?
Okay.
If they're really super engaged, disengaged, you might go, hey, we're going to actually try a 50% off deal with this person. And if they don't engage on that, then they're off the list. And they can just sort of start at the beginning of the funnel all back over again. So it kind of depends, but that gives you an idea that you want to be segmenting folks based upon their engagement with the brand, and then you want to be catering the type of content you send to them based upon how engaged they are.
And I'm just going to make an analogy here that a lot of us have had coffee shops, and it's cutting someone off the list is like someone walking through your shop, maybe using the bathroom, but not actually purchasing something and doing that every day. And you're like, you know what? I just kind of wish they wouldn't come in. And and it sounds a little rough, but if they're taking a seat or if they're taking resources that are otherwise you're not getting any value from, there's something to be said about I shouldn't be bothering them. I shouldn't even be engaging with them because it's just not worth my time. Maybe the best analogy would be you don't have to. I don't want to say something that sounds crass, but there's something to be said about talking to people that want to respond back to you in some way, whether that's an open, whether that's a conversation, or whether that's a purchase.
Yeah, and if someone's so disengaged, they've kind of forgotten who you are, right? It makes way more sense for them to start at the beginning of your sales funnel, your marketing funnel, and kind of go through all that nurturing again anyway, versus them just being stuck on this list that sort of assumes they know who you are and what you do.
I like that.
Okay, so let's talk a little about sort of for subscriptions. So for those of you guys that are already running subscriptions, how to utilize email to reduce what we call quote unquote churn. So another kind of marketing term, but the idea here is like your churn rate is the sort of the rate that people are actually unsubscribing from your subscription on a monthly basis, let's say, right? So, if you've got, you've got 100 people in your subscription and every month, 2 people, are unsubscribing, you've got a, 2% churn rate. So super easy math. But the idea here is when you have subscriptions and you're focusing on building customer lifetime value, churn is like, it's frankly the most important number other than conversion. And it's however much longer you can keep somebody on that subscription is going to influence how much of a lifetime value they have for you, but it's also going to influence what you can do on the marketing side to get somebody to subscribe. You might be willing to, pay $100 for a customer if you know that their lifetime value is $200, right? Because you've been able to increase the amount of time they stay in your subscription program from 6 months to 8 months, right? So looking at ways to reduce churn is a really good way to improve margins and also give you a ton more cannon fodder to do marketing on the front end. So how do you actually do that with email? First, and sort of like the quote unquote unsophisticated term we use is just churn time. So how long is somebody on your subscription program on average, right? When's the average point in time that they churn off of your subscription program? For most e-com consumer brands, we typically see this. It depends on the frequency of sends. If you're sending something every single month, most of the time we see that between month 2 and 3. For really good brands that have really strong brand equity, it's between 4 and 5. It's always going to depend on your brand. And so you've got to calculate this number yourself and look at your data and see what that average churn time is. But the idea is once you know what it is, that's a ton of really helpful information because you can then start to target what you send to them right before they churn, right? Yeah. So if you know somebody on average churns 3 months into the program, month 2 is a really heavy content month that you need to be sending inspirational, emotional content, stuff that got them to buy in the first place. Usage content that's going to help improve sort of usage. Talking about sort of the backstory, the history of the product. If you're going to be introducing a new product, if it's actually a sort of like a roaster's choice, I think was the terminology, right? Talking about what's coming ahead, even if it's a few months ahead, like getting them excited and sort of future pacing them a bit. So it all depends on sort of what your subscription program is, but the idea here is you can use email automations or even email campaigns, one-off campaigns to target people that are in this sort of, red zone, danger zone of churn to help decrease them from leaving, the rate of them leaving. So email is incredibly powerful for doing that.
Love that.
Okay. So that's the bulk of what we're talking about. So it's, how to increase AOV, how to increase subscriptions, how to increase retention. We can see, I don't even remember what other slides are in here. Oh yeah, we can make this at the end if you want me to make this at the end, which is just sort of like our offer if you guys are interested.
Sure. So why don't we, let's go talk about questions a little bit. So
sure.
We definitely have a lot of people asking questions and now there's more coming in.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I want to address one thing that's kind of, that there's one question is about third-party subscription services. So one thing in the coffee world is that there's other brands that are basically acting as the warehouse, right? And then they're selling your coffee, they're selling everybody else's coffee, and roasters are being the facilitators at that point, just supplying the product. I would argue that that's a whole different discussion and doesn't drive the value that we're talking about today, right? Of you owning that relationship and you owning that direct connection, and I don't know. Yeah, like I don't think that that's what I would be spending my time on right now as a roaster. As like finding other platforms to build out a subscription with my brand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So, and again, everybody's got to make their own sort of business decisions. So I don't want to make folks' decisions for them.
Right.
In the way that the brands that we see the most successful typically have, multiple legs of the stool, right? So they're selling through multiple sales channels. They're selling through wholesale. They're selling through retail. They're selling through third-party distributors or even doing white label product, food services, like lots of different angles to be selling your product. End of the day, though, the only one you actually control is the list and the audience that you own. And ultimately, if you're, and again, I'm making assumptions as to what everybody's goals are in their business, so I don't want to do that. But like, let's say your goal is to sell the business. Ultimately, you're going to garner a premium for a brand. A brand that has value and equity, and it's something that could be added to another brand's or another business's portfolio. So owning that audience and owning that brand is going to be probably the most valuable way if you want to ever sell it. But that's again, that's just, it depends on your goals.
Yeah, and I think that I'm thinking even just about the lever that we're all trying to use right now, which is we want to sell more because wholesale's down, and
Yep.
you don't control that lever if it's on a third party site. And so I think in that context, I would focus on building out your own subscription program and kind of using that as much as possible right now.
Yep.
So there's a lot about let's see here. There's questions about we can talk about loyalty and like either strategies to incentivize members, subscription members, to basically to recruit other people. So is it like loyalty programs? And if you want, we can actually stop the share screen. We can just kind of make. What do you think?
No, I'm sorry. We can keep it here.
Okay.
I was actually going to try to open up the questions, and I think it changed the screen a little bit. But.
Yeah, like is that something that's powerful where people use subscribers to find the next subscriber for them through loyalty programs, referrals?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. So what you should be doing, we kind of talked about sort of like list segmentations and like email segmentations and things like that. One of the core sort of segments we tend to look at is something called like VIP segments. So every brand's different, kind of what your criteria would be for a VIP. But these are folks that are buying multiple product, engaging with you to a high degree. These are going to be the best folks that are going to be your sort of your brand advocates, right? So building out referral programs is a fantastic way to leverage brand advocates to drive new customers in. And so referrals can be anything from discounts of product or free product or access to new blends, right? So these are folks that are like super into your product and what you do, like giving them early access to things that they wouldn't get access to otherwise, just to sort of build up that connection with you even more so. Like it doesn't always have to be like a cash value, right? It can just be more exclusive access to things. Is a great way to sort of light the fire and stoke the fire of those brand advocates, and then get them to talk about the brand and then refer you guys.
Do you have any recommendations around, you had that tech stack up. Mm-hmm. Is there something that you'd recommend, plug and play? People are asking about like what services could make that easy or?
Yeah. So if you're on a platform like Shopify, it's very easy. There's a handful of really good ones. What I always say before I mentioned, technology for loyalty programs is that, I'd probably say 9 out of 10 brands that try to do loyalty do this exact thing where they just plug a plugin in and hope it does something, and it never does. You need to have a strategy in place first. You need to have it fully integrated into your marketing, right? So you can't just open up a loyalty program and expect people to use it. It has to be integrated into everything you do, from first interaction to displaying loyalty rewards or points on the site in different places. People understand it. Integrating into your email marketing. You also should incorporate into things like advertising. So like it needs to be deeply integrated into your marketing for it to work. Now, that all being said, if you understand what the program is going to be and how you're going to leverage it, how you're going to integrate it, the best tools to do so would probably be either a tool called smile.io. There's another tool called stamped.io, which is actually a reviews platform that just recently launched a loyalty version. There's Swell Rewards. And then if you're looking specifically just for referrals, there's a tool called Referral Candy.
Okay, great. There's some questions about pricing and kind of like, is there a sweet spot around subscriptions, and kind of like if you hit the $20 mark, that's a place where customers like to subscribe and save. And is there any kind of thought around that?
It totally varies, right? And the best way to understand that would be to test it. So it's so when you say price point, so for coffee, coffee is a very specific product, and again, everybody here is going to have different price points that buy coffee, right?
Right.
And so some of that's also an operational question around shipping, and you have to understand your unit economics to know what you can offer. But at the end of the day, you should be testing multiple different offers and price points to see what is the sweet spot between conversion, order value, and profitability. So it's that's not it's not the answer everybody wants, because everybody wants just a straight answer, but that's the correct answer.
For those of us who were on last week's webinar with Joe Morocco, the answer was to test. I mean, it's like pretty much everything in business and life is we're not quite sure, so let's test. So, and this is no different. Let's see here. So there's a question about just in general, like, there's a question about subscriptions available. Does it turn off customers if they're looking at the site for the first time? We kind of talked about that earlier. I don't know if you think that that's a turnoff kind of from moment one to.
Nope. Yeah. If you give them the option, if you're giving them one-off options and you're giving them a subscribe and save option, no, we've not seen that hurt conversions on first-time purchase.
Let's see here. Abigail has a question about I'm not sure if I understand. I might have to follow up with like, question about good examples of how other companies have kind of multiple levels of subscriptions. So, whether that's like the single bag offering and then all the way to maybe these roaster choice or these 3 or 6 bag kind of options. I think that's kind of what she's going for. But, is there ever too much? I guess, with the subscription model, can we lean into it too much, I guess?
Again, it kind of depends on the audience, kind of depends on the product. The answer I always give is your strategic advantage is to be able to sell more on a single purchase, right? Or for every customer you have to spend money to acquire, the more you can get that customer to buy from you, the more of an advantage you have against competition. And coffee is an incredibly, competitive space. I think it's, what's the stat? Like, coffee is the number 2 most consumed non-alcohol beverage in the world aside from water, right? Like, infinite competition. Also, even, infinite market opportunity. So there's a ton of space out there for it. But the more you can get somebody to buy on first purchase, like we were talking about those, the Life Boost example, those AOVs, most coffee brands probably have an AOV that's probably somewhere between $15 to $30, buying a single bag of coffee. Life Boost AOV was something like $66, right? Wow. So like, how much more can they spend on advertising than you can to get that first purchase, right? That's a significant competitive advantage. And so what I would hesitate saying, and I know people have a lot of hesitation for pushing offers and pushing high, bundles and subscriptions, and that's fine. But what I would argue is test and see what works. Test going higher, because at the end of the day, if you can get it higher, that's going to be a significant advantage for you.
That's great. There's kind of 2 other sets of questions, and we can. There's this recharge versus bold conversation, sure. And then there's also about shipping with subscriptions, whether that should be, do you package that? Do you offer that separately? What's the way to either include that as a line item or not, or how does that work with these programs? So how do you, so let's answer this, the bold versus recharge one first. That's an easy one. Bold's great. Love bold. We use bold too. They're a little bit different. Recharge as a app is purely subscription focused. And so I think they've done a better job of building out a more robust infrastructure around it. I think it's also easier to implement. And so just from a technology implementation standpoint, that's why we typically use them for just basic subscription programs. Bold has some more sophisticated options for things like subscription boxes and sort of changing what's in your box and changing orders. So there are use cases where Bold is better than Recharge. We use them both, and it's sort of on a per business basis. So I would definitely not turn you away from Bold. If you're using Bold and it's working for you, stick with it. No reason to. Right.
And then so the next question was shipping, right? Was that a question around like how do you message shipping for subscriptions?
I think that there's a lot of questions about is the assumption that when you subscribe, and please folks jump in here with comments or chat if I'm misstating this, but like that $18 slide that you had up, mm-hmm. does that include shipping? So we had this product we would have charged shipping for. So it was $19.99, but suddenly when you subscribe, does that mean that you imply that there's free shipping on that? And how do we?
So you need to message that. That's kind of goes back to that set of like logical questions you talked about. If people don't understand, then they're either not going to buy, or they're going to be disappointed when they do buy, and they're going to cancel. So you need to be very clear around, what you're offering. And at the end of the day, this comes back to just understanding your unit economics and what you can offer. If you can offer a single bag on subscription with a 10% discount and free shipping, fantastic, do it, right? If you can't, right, then don't do it. And let's come up with an offer that you can do that makes sense for your unit economics. 2 bags every 2 months, right? 3 bags every 3 months, once a quarter, right? Like, and there's pros and cons to doing sort of delayed deliveries and things like that too. So there's lots of things to assess, but where I'd start with is figuring out, what's the sort of the simplest subscription offer you can do that makes the most sense. If you're doing a $15 bag and they're buying it and paying for shipping anyway, getting a 10% off that bag and still paying for shipping is still a deal and still an incentive for doing a subscription, right? So there should not be the assumption that subscription gets free shipping unless you're messaging that. But if you can do free shipping and you can come up with subscription that does include free shipping, or you can bake at least enough of the shipping price in to the cost, then obviously that's going to help with conversions.
Great. Okay, great. I just looked at what the time was, folks. Just wanted to, we've gone an hour here. I really appreciate everybody's time, and that's kind of what we had budgeted. But maybe we could have one last question, kind of wrap things up a little bit, and then we'll let everybody get back to the day to day of hopefully building your brands and selling more online. I actually think it's dovetailing into what you were just talking about. That's why I wanted to bring this up, which is, should there be a discount on a subscription? Is that something that's implied in this whole process?
It's not implied. Definitely not
Okay.
implied. There's, and specifically with product like coffee, right? Where at the end of the day, like, if somebody's a huge brand advocate and they love what you do, right, and they're going to buy your coffee anyway, there's also a convenience factor associated with it. So you do not have to automatically jump to a discount, but it will help get people to opt in to a subscription versus a one-off.
Great. Well, thanks, Allen. I really appreciate the time. And I know that this has been hopefully informative and given us a lot to think about. Obviously, your slide's up here. How can people reach out to you? How can they find out more about what you do? And yeah, kind of speak to that.
Yeah, and again, this is not meant to be a sales pitch by any means. It's just for folks that are interested. And we basically have sort of 2 ways. Both of these things are totally free. The one on the left is really mainly for brands that are sort of established brands doing at least $1 million in revenue online. Anything less than that, we just can't really help that much. But if you are doing at least $1 million in revenue online, and you want to talk about any of this in more depth or have us look at your numbers, you can sign up for a strategy call for our team. We set aside a certain amount of hours every week just to do these calls with brands. It's not a sales pitch. It's literally meant to be helpful. If you're in a position where it makes sense for us to help you, and you can take that info and work with us if you want to, or you can just do it on your own. So that's the whole point of it. So for brands that are doing over $1 million in rev, we do these strategy calls. And then for everybody, we actually have a fantastic podcast and newsletter where we talk about this exact kind of stuff. And we send that out every single week, totally free. We're probably going to make it a premium newsletter eventually, but for now, anybody signs up, it's completely free. And so for that, you go to thecommercelab.com for that newsletter. In fact, we're actually sending one out today that specifically breaks down the messaging playbook of Death Wish Coffee. So we did a podcast with Will Critcher from Death Wish, and we break down how he messages to different segments of his audiences based upon age and generation. And so we're breaking down his strategy in the newsletter that's going out today. So didn't time that, but that's actually very relevant to what you guys do. And then again, if you're doing over $1 million online and you want to talk to us, you can head over to bluestout.com/strategy and sign up for a call.
Great. Well, thanks, Allen. That was amazing. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join. We will keep on finding content and trying to share things. Again, my name's Jon Ewalt. I'm of RoasterTools, and our job is to help you all succeed. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day and stay safe.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thanks, Allen. All right.